Ticket volume listeners, are you going to Service Management World? Because we're going to do a live ticket volume podcast from the event. Meet us in the expo hall for the last solution spotlight session right before the prize drawings for a real discussion about things you care about. Hear about the conference, what we're learning, and how this industry is going to change. I hope to see you there. This episode of Ticket Volume is brought to you by us, InvGate. Get service operations under control in no time. Get 1 free month of our software solution by going to try.invigate.com. Ticket Volume is proud to present one of my former bosses. He got his start as an IT service delivery manager at Intuit and had a short stint at Albertsons before becoming an ITSM program manager and director of IT client services for Employers, an insurance company in Reno. Then they worked as a consultant for many years with companies like Pepperweed Consulting, Cognizant Technology Solutions, DXC Technology, and a short stint doing that all independently before joining ServiceNow, where he led pre-sales architects to leverage the capabilities of the platform. And he recently moved to Airtable, where he's the director of Global Presales Strategic Services. Welcome to Ticket Volume, news and information for improving IT experiences. I'm your host, Matt Beran. And on each episode, I get to chat with different leaders to share insights on service management, technology, business. And this episode is going to be more of that gooey goodness. And hey, speaking of, do you want to continue the conversation after this episode? Comment on YouTube, Spotify, or if you're already on Spotify, check out our surveys on there. We're using these to dig deeper into the topics. Or you can just go there and tell me that my hair is messed up and I need to switch it up. So I hope you're having a great day and a great week. And I also hope that you'll leave a comment, connect with us, or share our podcast with someone. But for now, let's get started. Welcome to Ticket Volume, Shane Carlson.
How you doing, sir? Very happy to be here. I was actually going to bring up your hair. Watching the evolution of Matt Beran's hair over the last 15 plus years has been kind of a personal, I'll say a hobby of mine. And I would say the current iteration of Matt Beran's hair is definitely my favorite. So,
nice, thank you. I agree.
Great style.
I like where
it's on point. It works well with the glasses and the stubble. I'm a fan, actually.
Thank you very much.
I may start a fan club for Matt Beran's hair.
So I love the way this podcast is starting out. I constantly see the high peaks coming into my hair, but you know what? I feel more comfortable in my older age than I did in my younger age. I feel like I finally know some things, right?
Look, I'd never trade, getting my hair back for the wisdom and experience I've gained over the last 25 plus years, both personally and professionally. So they can keep the hair. I'll take the knowledge.
Yeah, and it's been a blast. I'll never forget our time together. You basically trained me to be a consultant, which thank you for your patience. Doing that with someone with ADHD has to be a complete challenge in and of itself. But cutting my teeth on that first project out east, I really learned so much about the client and the business relationship. And what's interesting to me is that it really felt like a junction point for our entire industry. We were doing the digital transformations, right? Is that how you felt about that time period, kind of?
I do indeed. As you said, it was a pivot point for the industry, and I think not to do any real foreshadowing about some of the conversation we're hoping to have today, but I think it was the start of where process started to take a back seat to transformation outcomes, to the need to constantly accelerate the rate at which an organization could be agile and very quickly adapt to ever-changing conditions. And this feeling that process equated to bureaucracy in many ways. And, I think, we saw this was what, 2009, 2010 timeframe. I remember that time fondly as well. I remember verbatim singing at the top of my lungs as we're driving down the freeway trying to catch our flights in Boston. The it takes two to make a things go right. So if that's the kind of stuff you were talking about learning from me, yeah, absolutely.
Yep. You
Those
gotta
were
learn
great
it.
times.
You gotta learn the lyrics. You gotta learn to relax is really what it is. Because after those high intensity implementation meetings, it can get heated. And I think that's a great thing, actually. I think it's great that people are passionate about it and that they care about technology and where we're going and they care about their jobs. And you're right. That really felt like a time where process started to feel more like governance and less like enablement. And you see it now with change enablement being the ITIL 4 term. Like, of course, we have a branding problem in process management. And what's really interesting is that project, I'll say that it got scrapped. We'll say that it got scrapped. But what the client ended up with was these great process maps that we had built before we even selected what tooling we were going to implement. And I remember this being like a complete, a new way of thinking about consulting. We weren't just a VAR. We weren't just a value added reseller. We're going into every shop. We're saying, you're going to put in this tool. Here is our process pack that you have to follow or anything like that. It really was sitting with the business in some really uncomfortable, challenging meetings and asking them what they needed, right?
Absolutely. And I think, it's funny. So I'll make a controversial statement, here up front that we can deconstruct here in the rest of our conversation. But the days of process driven work is done. The
Mm.
days of forms driven work is done. That era has passed. And I know that's kind of controversial, right? And I'm a huge fan of process. I built a career on it. The entirety of my management consulting was using fun words like process decomposition and instructional level detail, and really looking at things like CMMI and maturity models and understanding how things were based off very specific aspects of a process that came from IDLE, that came from IT for IT, any number of best practice process frameworks or good practices. They were things that I studied in great detail and talked to customers about. But the reality is that time frame, as things were moving to the cloud, as we started looking at things like DevOps and Agile, the Agile Manifesto was driving a lot of the way teams were thinking about building digital products. And I remember the early days, the fear in the ITSM community, especially around what does Agile and DevOps mean to ITSM. And we had years and years of I would say, fruitless debates about how ITSM was a better approach, how we could never eliminate process. And I think the reality is the reason we were so focused on process before 2010, and I would say going all the way back to the days of Henry Ford and assembly lines and manufacturing, is that the technology didn't exist to ensure the outcomes we were driving for as organizations. And I won't say assure, I'll actually say ensure more
Yeah.
than assure, right? Is technology doesn't by itself drive outcomes.
No.
But what it does do is it allows us to see what's happening in the work that's occurring, compare that to the outcomes we're trying to achieve, and allow us to make better near real time decisions about how that work is performing and take corrective action in the moment rather than using lagging indicators in many cases, which we have been doing for years. And the reason why process was so important: follow these steps to achieve these outcomes, then measure, then look at the information, then go back and make incremental improvements to continue to drive those. The reality is, with the technology that we have today, with the observability that we have today with technology, whether we're talking about a business process, an IT process, any of these things, we have the ability to understand in near real time what's happening in these processes and make adjustments that allow us to continue to drive towards the outcomes. Or if the outcomes change or need to change, or the industry change or the market changes, we can pivot and we can adjust much more
Mm.
quickly. So when I say process is dead, I don't mean that process is no longer important. I mean that the emphasis of where we put our energy doesn't need to be as heavy in taking 9 months to plan for what we want this process to be, and then taking 12 months to put a tool in place and 18 months to measure against that. I'm saying if we know the outcome we're driving towards, let's start moving in that direction, and let's measure as we go, and let's adjust as we go, and let's constantly check where we are on the map to make sure we're achieving what we're trying to do. So we can invest limited resources in planning, or we can take a directionally correct approach and adjust our course along the way. And I'll use an example. I'm about to drive to Washington, right, where we've got a little place on the coast. And there are 5 different ways that I can take to get there, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes I'll change the direction I'm going based off road conditions, what I'm seeing, the weather, outside things that could influence. Do I take a lower mountain pass to avoid snow or weather or fires, which we have a lot of in the West? Thankfully, that's calming down. But the reality is I can take 5 different paths to get me there. And at any point in the journey, typically, I can pivot and take a different course to get me there. And they'll all get me there within about an hour or two of, my travel time. So I'm going to start on one path, but if I need to adjust and change that path to get to the destination, I know where I'm going,
Yeah.
right? I know where I need to be by, this time, 10 p.m., this time tomorrow. What I don't know is the path that I'm going to take. I have a general idea. I know which path I prefer. I'm going to plug this into Waze. It's going to take me on the path that I go. But because of Waze, I'm going to know, is traffic bad ahead of me? Am I going to spend an hour and a half getting through Portland? Do I need to go around Portland? Should I take a different path? Those options are available to me, and I'm not going to worry about it because I have information at my fingertips that allow me to adjust my trip, my path of travel as I go.
Ah, there's so much in this metaphor to unpack already. Okay. I love that you pointed out the map and that you know where you're going, because I think like right away that's where my brain goes is once how does an organization do that? How do we, because I think we still need some processes, right? Like we're gonna onboard employees. Let's not screw that up. We're gonna do the same 50 steps every time. But I think what you're
Yeah,
saying is
but
like,
but let me ask a question on
yeah,
that, right? Especially employee onboarding. How many different ways are there to onboard an employee,
yeah, 100
right?
about
But the pattern's the same. The goal is the
patterns the
same
same.
for every organization is within X amount of time, I need this employee to be X% productive or enabled in the job I'm needing them to do. That's the destination. If we start with the destination in mind, a lot of the pathways are predictable, right? Why would we spend 6 months deconstructing all of the things we need to do to onboard somebody when a lot of that work can either be commoditized, handled by a third party, or otherwise? So I'll let you get
Yeah.
back to your story, but I think we spend so much time thinking about the problem before we actually understand the outcome that we're driving towards. Let's start with the
Yes.
end in mind. Let's start with the thing we need to do, and let's just get on the path. Let's, again, directionally correct is always better than perfect.
And we saw this when we were building these process heavy implementations. The questions that always came up were always the outliers. Okay, imagine we're onboarding this employee and we find out that they have a specific need. They have they're visually impaired, so they need larger screens, higher contrast software. Very specific needs. How do we accommodate that person in this rigid process? And I love the counter that you've already presented: patterns versus processes. We're
Yeah.
headed towards this one goal, and we've got, say, some guardrails down to say, okay, we're not going to spend $1,000 on every new hire to buy them Taylor Swift tickets to, rock their world and make a delightful experience. But we can say, hey, you can flex in this process. You can negotiate a different salary. You can negotiate different benefits with this person because every person is unique. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Uh, yes, right. It's very interesting. Having onboarded into a new company recently, I can talk to the experience, and it's very interesting too because I most recently spent 7 years at a company that prides itself on its ability to enable onboarding for other
Yes.
companies, right? And I had a great onboarding process into that company 7 years ago. I hired, let's see, over 20 people in the 7 years that I was there. They were really good at onboarding. I had low expectations coming into another company that doesn't necessarily specialize in helping other companies onboard.
Okay.
And what I found actually blew me away. The entire process was simpler. It was transparent. I had clear understanding and expectations. And in many ways, the experience exceeded my expectations based off what I had been doing to help other companies do onboarding for the last 20 years. Um, because they thought of things that were important and they actually did give you choices along the way, right? About, hey, what do you need to set up your office, right? Here's
Mm-hmm.
what we provide as a company. If you already have monitors, just tell us you don't need a monitor. We won't send you a monitor. And do you want a small, lightweight computer, or do you want something that's a little more powerful? You know, and they would let me, based off my role, I could pick from a couple computers. But if I wanted something different, I could go outside the box and tell them, hey, I need this, and this is why, and they just ordered it. And that order wasn't fulfilled by some IT person sitting in a room somewhere in our company's walls. It was fulfilled by a company that sells computers for a living. And that computer came directly from them, from the third party seller. It showed up at my house within 24 hours. The first time I logged into it, all of the corporate stuff just basically got applied. All the policies, everything else got applied to that system. And I was up and running on my first day of work in minutes. And I had all the application access I needed. I had everything. There's a single place to go to get it. But then the rest of the part is like, hey, as a new person working from home in this company, we know everybody likes to work a little different. So here's $1,000 to set up your home office in the way that makes sense for you to work. You know what I did? I bought a really nice fancy chair because,
Yes.
I've had a number of chairs over the years. And again, in this work, we spend a lot of time sitting. I also have a fancy standing desk that I already had that I can sit or stand as needed. But I got a chair because, this ass is firmly planted in this seat many days for 6, 8 hours at a time. And I want it to be comfortable. My wife will tell you that ass doesn't exist. It's a figment of my imagination because my pants won't stay up without a belt. But the reality is, whatever it is, bones, muscle, sinew, something
Yeah.
sitting on a chair. If that chair is not comfortable, I'm not going to be comfortable and I'm not going to be doing my best work. So I had $1,000 to decide what I needed to make my workspace more comfortable for me so that I can show up and do my best work. But that's that set of controlled choices that you give someone on a journey makes all the difference. Again, you can have global policies that are very fixed in, hey, I need these outcomes to be achieved, while still allowing a degree of local flexibility by department, by region, by person, by choice to allow people to make the choices they feel are going to allow them to work in a way that delivers the best work for the thing that's in front of them. We don't have to force people on a rigid path. If we design with the outcome in mind and know that some people require, or some departments or some geographies require flexibility to get that job done, and they deliver the thing in a way that's consistent with the global outcome you're driving towards, that's the key to agility. That's the key to making people feel connected to the work. That's the key to understanding and driving value and the ability to adjust and adapt on the journey without this need to go through months of research, evaluation, understanding, and process improvement.
So the
And this
lesson
is from
here,
someone who trained as in Six Sigma for
yeah,
the last 25 years, who understands rigid processes and how you deconstruct things and analyze things.
and we love
There's
it.
no need, and it's good stuff. It's great tools in the
Yeah.
toolbox on the journey. But again, the more flexible you are as you design these pathways, the better.
Yes.
It's,
That last phrase is important because
yeah,
you can hear it. You can hear how brittle the process can be. When it's rigid, it can be brittle. And that brittleness makes it breakable. It what does it do? It
yeah.
pushes our customers away. It pushes our business partners away because that we're
It
not
pushes our employees away. If
bingo.
an employee feels like they don't have some choice in how they work and how they do things, or if they have a better way of doing it,
Mhm.
they're not going to enjoy the work that they're doing. They're not going to deliver their best work for you. They're not going to help you be productive. And very likely, they're not going to stick around. They're going to look for something that allows them to exercise that big brain that they have to execute things in a way that gives you the outcome you're looking for without forcing them up down a path that doesn't feel flexible or efficient for the way that they work.
Yes. Okay, so we give them choices. I think the lesson here really is if you're a process designer, this is like a mindset shift that you need to overcome. You need to be able to build the processes that still fill your goals, still hit your compliance needs, still hit all the business check boxes, but really you need to be thinking about processes in a less rigid way. It's not a dichotomy. It's
Yeah.
not yes or no. It's not all working, all broken. It's somewhere in between. And I think for me, Shane, what I would like to know is how do you spot it? Like how do you know that this is existing? How do you what are the symptoms that appear?
So the symptoms that appear when something isn't working the way you hoped it would work.
Yeah.
This goes back to that conversation about patterns versus process, right? If you start with the outcome in mind and you know that there are different patterns that can be applied to get to that outcome, depending on the input, steps that need to be taken along the way the customer prefers to interact, etc. And you define the patterns and say, hey, there are four ways to do something in this process. Depending on what needs to be done and all these variables, you may apply one of these patterns, you may apply two or three of these patterns, or you may have to go out of pattern and problem solve. And I'll go back to what you referenced earlier and something I'm sure you heard me say many times in the room. Design for the outcome and the path that's most common. Build in things to handle exceptions or highlight when things aren't on a path that you expect them to be, and empower people to deal with exceptions to the process. Because if you put all your energy into designing for the exceptions, you're going to spend 80% of your time dealing with things that happen less than 20% or sometimes less than 2 or 3% of the process.
True.
And again, it's empower people to make decisions that are appropriate to their level and their responsibility. I think so many times we try and cater to the lowest common denominator with people and try and make the work so on rails that when
Mm.
something outside of that system, that process, that linear way of thinking happens, the entire system gets disrupted. And it's really interesting. I mean, we could delve into conversations that would probably be more appropriate for like a Jake Bloom or a Kevin Bear around, systems thinking and, hyper local optimization versus system level optimization and all these fun things
Yeah.
that I love to talk about. But the reality is when we spend so much time trying to build single linear pathways through work that needs to be done, we're creating a lack of opportunity to look for efficiencies, a lack of opportunity for really smart people to find creative ways to make things better. And when you allow people to think and be creative in how they deliver against this thing you've asked them to do, they feel better about their work. They do better for your customers, which in turn makes your shareholders happy. And I'm just a firm believer that people need to feel like they have some choice in doing the things you need them to do, as long as they are achieving the outcome that you're hoping they achieve in a way that's consistent with what you need them to do. And, I think about this often because I run into organizations that are like, well, we have this thing we need people to do and we hold them accountable to it. And we have all these reports that say when, you took a 16-minute break instead of a 15-minute break, and I needed you in the warehouse picking parts to put into a box to ship to somebody's house and they need it tomorrow. When, if they allowed people to take breaks when they needed them, and just said, hey, I need you to do X number of things today, pick X number of orders. And whether they pick those orders in the last 2 hours of their day or they pick them in the first 2 hours of the day, does it really matter? If they're achieving the outcomes you need them to achieve to make the system work, does it matter how they do it? As long as the quality is there, as long as the outcome is there, as long as it supports things. And what you're going to find, and again, I always go back to these studies where you look at the way people design cities and pathways through public places, through parks, and you have all these paths. And I think is it Michigan State or Ohio State is very famous for this. Is they design these sidewalks and they realize people take different, more efficient paths through the park, and how they recognize that is through worn paths in the grass. And this particular university, I think it's Ohio somewhere, they will sit there, and if the path is worn through a grass area over a period of time, they will actually go pave a pathway through there. And you can see these pictures of the park. And, maybe you can find a picture and flash it up. I'll see if I can find it and send it to you. But they have all these crisscrossing paths, and it may not look the most aesthetically pleasing, but the reality is it's optimized for how people want to walk through these spaces to get to the places that they're trying to get to. They have found the efficient pathways to get the things done that they need to get done. And so when you listen to people, when you watch how they work, when you watch the shortcuts they take, and I'll use people in call centers as an amazing example of this. People who are in call centers, supporting your customers, supporting your employees, always find the most creative ways to get work done. And I have a great example of this that is probably 20 years old at this point. Is when I was working for one of those companies you listed earlier, as a help desk director of support. We were trying to figure out like why things weren't working well in one of our offshore call centers. And so we got on and we're like, just show us what you do, show us how you work. And what we
Yeah.
realized is the system they were working on was so slow that it took a full 45 seconds for something they typed on the screen to actually appear in the field that they were typing in. And so what they were learning to do is they knew they could type, they could tab to the next field, they could type, they could tab to the next field. They would fill out the entire form, tab all the way through that form, and just wait for it to fill in almost a full minute behind where their typing was. Then they could click submit and be done. Right? People find the most efficient paths to get the work done, regardless of whether you're giving them the tools and the systems they need to do it.
Yeah. And our job in IT is to just do that. Give them the tools and the systems that they need. And I just love this episode because it already I can see that this is where the opportunity for service management is, right? Letting go of our Bibles, letting go of what we have thought we were doing, governing, controlling, process, and instead listening to the customer and building something that still meets those needs, right?
Yeah. Do we want to manage services or do we want to drive outcomes? What
Bingo.
what are we trying to do in service management? And I think it's very interesting. I think one of the things to think about in that regard, look at what is happening to many IT organizations. They've been relegated into, I would say, a commoditized space.
Mm-hmm.
The
They're a
famous book that was
utility.
written. That's exactly where I was going. There was a famous book written many years ago that basically said IT is a commodity,
Hmm.
right? That can be done by anyone. And more businesses that I encounter every day are thinking in that way, right? IT functions are broken down into very specific forms of infrastructure. Hosting is handled on somebody else's cloud, on somebody
Yeah.
else's computer. Administration of these systems is ubiquitous.
Hmm.
If you're administering a AWS system, do you need 20 people in your organization to do that, or can you hire someone who can bring 20 people with those specific skills to do that? So I think more and more we're seeing a consolidation of what we know is considered classic IT infrastructure skills being consolidated into the BPOs of the world, to the MSPs
Mm.
of the world, who are becoming the executors of that type of work within any business. And IT in its infancy, in the days of, the early days of client server, the early days of getting off of green screens and AS400s and mainframes, was a competitive advantage for you as a company. If you had smart IT folks who could
Mm.
bring in the right technology and solve these problems, you could transform quicker than your competitors. You could bring your services to market where people were buying them in the early days of the internet, and you truly drove a competitive advantage around that. What you're seeing nowadays is the infrastructure doesn't provide a competitive advantage. Managing that
Hmm.
infrastructure, managing the processes around IT doesn't give you a competitive advantage to the market. So what's happening is CIOs, especially IT folks who are managing infrastructure, are basically being seen as this: hey, I need you to become as efficient as possible. I need you to drive cost out of this technology wherever you can. So they're not investing in IT as a transformation engine. They're not investing in it as a form of digital transformation. The responsibilities for digital transformation now sit in the CIDO or the
Mm.
CTO or the business technology teams, who have been empowered to do what they need to do to drive these business outcomes in different ways. And when you come to them and you say, let's talk about incident management, problem management, or change management, they look at you and go, that sounds like something I don't have time to do.
Yeah.
I need to do these things. And we all know that things like change control and change enablement are important. The reality is, though, is a lot of that work has been commoditized in many ways. I was looking at one of your recent episodes with a good friend of ours, Greg Sanker, with cabs are dead. Of course they are. Cabs never should have been a thing. This is something I talked about, when I went to employers insurance, is if we have to have a meeting to make a change in the organization, we're doing something wrong.
Yeah.
Right? Like, we should know. We should empower people to make decisions at a level of risk that is appropriate to their station in the organization. And we should only reserve phone calls and face to face meetings for when something has the highest potential risk to the business.
Yeah.
Like, and we instituted that in a way that, like, hey, if you had an emergency change, that had to go to the CIO for approval. Are you sure it's an emergency change? Can it wait till the change window? Right? Do you really want to press that button and have the CIO of the company pick up the phone and call you to ask if this absolutely needs to happen now? Now, great. If it absolutely needs to happen now, everybody should already know about it. When he gets that request to approve the change, either retroactively or in the moment, he should already know why it's happening. So, like, changing behaviors, changing things. And again, the whole point there was we're focused on the outcome, which is reduce risk to the business by introducing unnecessary changes on short-term basis until we understood what the impact of that was, and changes that were low impact, low risk to the business, and had a low probability of creating an incident or an outage should just flow through the system normally.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. I think we knew it. A lot of us knew it all along that putting these stop gates in our processes and stopping innovation, stopping growth and change and all these things, a lot of us knew that it was a bad idea. My question
I
for
wouldn't
you
even
though
say I
is,
wouldn't even say it's a bad idea, Matt. So much as is it was the right idea at a point in time because we didn't have any other choice.
yeah.
We had to control risk. we had to get our arms around this
Yeah.
thing that was evolving and changing so rapidly.
Yeah, because the
But the reality
technology,
is,
the technology wasn't adaptable, right? It was
yeah,
very rigid. We didn't have the redundancy that we have now. We didn't have hot failover. We didn't have any of that. We called it high availability, but I don't
yeah.
know really what that meant.
It meant 5 nines, which nobody understood, and nobody
Yeah,
recognized the cost that it took to have 20 minutes of downtime in a year. The
yeah,
reality is maybe 20 minutes of downtime was way too much for the cost that it took to get there.
true.
Maybe your services could accept 2 hours of downtime, maybe 20 hours of downtime, maybe
Yeah,
20 hours of downtime a week, depending on when it happened and when your customers needed your services. So I think the tendency was to overbuild, to over
yes,
constrain, to over plan everything because we didn't have any other choice at that time. We were reacting to what was available to us, and we were trying to mitigate risk, enable business transformation. And the world has changed. What else do you do today that you did 20, 30 years ago when it comes to technology, even in your personal life,
check your
right?
email.
You think, yeah. I
That's
mean,
it.
I've moved into a company that barely uses email.
Yeah, same,
Everything's in Slack.
same.
Everything's real-time communication, right? Like,
It's nice.
again, think about this, right? In 2010, you and I were getting in a car and driving to a little New Hampshire hamlet every week for 4 days a week so we could sit face to face with our customers,
Yeah,
right? And here we are recording a podcast talking about those times, right? Looking each other in the eye and having a productive and fruitful conversation
the world has changed.
because this technology wasn't available
Yeah,
then and wasn't widely accepted. All right. You think about again, people make this reference all the time. We're walking around with more computing power in our pocket than it took
yeah,
to put people on the moon. Right. I was having this conversation with someone last week. Is it used to be you were curious about something. Hey, what's that building over there on the other side of Dallas called? Great. Let me pull out my phone and get you that answer. 20 years ago, we would have just wondered
yeah.
because the information and the technology wasn't available for us to get those answers. Now we know the world has changed. We can't run businesses. We can't run IT organizations. We can't run service management organizations with the same thinking that we used 20 years ago because the world has changed around that thinking and we need to adapt.
Bingo. That is it, Shane Carlson. Dude, I want to thank you so much for taking some time to be on Ticket Volume today. I really enjoyed this conversation. I didn't think you were going to bring this kind of heat, and I'm really glad you did. Shane Carlson, how can people connect with you and learn more?
Yeah, at this point, I have way too many connections. I don't want anyone to reach out to me to talk to me or no, I'm kidding. Look, I'm in there. I'm out there on LinkedIn. It's interesting. I think I've centered around LinkedIn as kind of the place where we can exchange connection and information. A lot of the other places in the world have become too polarized to have fruitful conversations. I like this is going to come as no surprise to you. I prefer personal connection over impersonal broadcast communication. If you want to have a conversation like this with me, reach out to me. I'm happy to find time to talk to you. I show up in places in the real world sometimes where other people who want to talk about these things are. If you'd like to see me in one of those places, send me an invitation. I'm happy to show up.
I
For
love that.
me, the relationships that we build in the course of driving into the future are more important than anything else. So
So
connection is
true.
key.
It's so true, and we'll find you on LinkedIn. We'll be in your DMs, Shane. Thank you so much for being on Taking Volume. Thanks for being here, man.
A pleasure, Matt. I'm sorry it took this long, my friend. I've
Yeah,
missed
we should have
talking to
done
you
it
like
sooner.
this.
That's true. But we've got a few things to cover. We've got a lot more episodes coming. And for our audience, did you know that you can change and improve this podcast by DMing me, leaving a comment, or by just answering our Spotify surveys? It's just another way to turn up the ticket volume. And speaking of ticket volume, did you know that this podcast is brought to you by InvGate? InvGate is a fit-for-purpose service management solution with integrated asset management designed to let you focus on supporting your organization without waiting for administrators to make the changes that you need for proper service management. In fact, IT teams from Toyota, NASA, and McDonald's use InvGate to manage requests, automate workflows, and centralize inventory data so that they can focus on delivering better service, because good service is good business.